What's a situation that most people won't understand until they've been in the same situation themselves?
Growing up in an abusive home environment. It's in the past. Forget about it. No. It gets imprinted on your brain. My dad had serious anger issues when I was growing up. I'm sure he still does, but being able to communicate with him on an adult level and not living with him and being able to pick and choose what parts of my life he sees definitely helps moderate his emotions. You learn the body language. You learn when they're about to explode, and you can only do what you can to minimize the chances of them exploding at you. Not that listening to dad going apeshit at my brother most days was much better tbh. I became a people pleaser. Some people call it the fawn. When I saw the signs, I'd become as small and quiet and invisible as possible. It definitely helped take the heat off me as a kid. Unfortunately, this is baked into me. My boyfriend is amazing, and for the most part treats me so well, but he does get stressed, from work, financial worries, etc. I recognize the body language. My lizard brain just tells me, the bomb is armed and ready to blow. I become small, quiet, and invisible. I leave him well alone and let him calm down on his own. This upsets my boyfriend more. He told me that he hated how I'd treat him so coldly when he was in a bad place, when what he wants most in those moments is for me to hug him and hold him and tell him I love him and that I'm there for him. I've explained why I unintentionally treat him coldly, and I've promised to treat him how he needs when he's stressed. So now, I recognize the body language. Lizard brain sees that the bomb is armed, and I have no choice but to go towards the bomb, put my arms around it and kiss it. It's terrifying. It's against every instinct in every part of my body. I don't think this will ever feel safe or normal to me. I hate that such normal social responses will always terrify me.
Taking care of a parent with dementia. Been there. Plus, people don't understand that when our dementia-suffering parent dies, the overwhelming emotion felt by the caregiver is not sadness, but relief. Relief that our loved one is no longer suffering, relief that the hardship of caregiving is over. The sadness already took place. We already underwent an extended grieving process while they were still alive, as our loved one disappears bit by painful bit. Having abusive parents completely skews your perception of normal. To this day, I'll mention something I thought was normal or funny and be met with looks of horror. I've been no contact with mine for just over 2 years now, having to constantly explain why to people who are quick to parrot but they're your parents, you have to love them is so exhausting. I'm about to get married in a year, and they won't be invited. I'm not looking forward to explaining why they won't be in attendance for the 12th time to my future in-laws who have less than zero experience with child abuse/neglect. Poverty. My wife and I had very different upbringings. What she considers poor and what I consider poor are completely different levels of poverty. I am glad she never had to experience that growing up, but a little more understanding of why I am set in my ways on some things would be appreciated. She has explained that for her, the experiences I and my siblings had are so foreign to her that she just can't understand. I worked with a guy who once casually mentioned that he didn't have indoor plumbing until he was a teenager. That puts things in perspective. Meanwhile, I worked with a mid-20s woman who didn't know how to pay her bills because her dad just pays the credit card bill. She also didn't know how to pump her own gas because her dad always made sure she had a full tank of gas. Yeah, my kids know nothing of this kind of life. It makes me glad, but also worried they won't be able to cope if life hits them the wrong way. Putting off going to the grocery store because there's no money to spend. Not bothering to ask if you can be a Girl Scout because you know your parents can't afford the uniform. Skipping lunches rather than ask your parents for lunch money they don't have. Eating potato soup made from skim milk and potatoes and loving every bite because you are so hungry. Wearing the same shirt in your kindergarten and second grade school pictures because that's the one nice shirt you had. Severe burnout, like a full fugue state mental shutdown. I tried describing it to some folks, and they just can't comprehend that level of chronic stress and exhaustion. Watching a movie or taking a day off is not going to help at that point. Still recovering myself from a pretty severe burnout in 2021. I still have days where memory is leakier than a sieve, and I have to ask the same question, hoping I write down the answer the right way multiple times an hour. It makes you feel so useless and incompetent. 90% better though, these days happen less and less frequently now. It makes you feel so useless and incompetent. I'm at this point right now. My roommate doesn't seem to fully understand. The little rest I do get is not nearly enough. It could be worse is something he says a lot, and yeah, it could be worse, but that doesn't help at all. I'm constantly stressed, tired, and easily agitated. I think about quitting or jumping in front of a train every day. I'm at a point where I feel like I'm legitimately at risk of completely collapsing at my desk any day now. I've been actively and aggressively applying to jobs for the past few months. I'm hoping that at least puts me on the path to recovery. I'm just tired of being angry and stressed all the time and really want to move on from this job that's been destroying my soul. Yeah, that's where I was. Turns out a job change from my toxic employer at the time was the only real solution. Sometimes you just gotta get out of a bad situation. To answer my own question, I would say losing a loved one to suicide. My brother took his life 3 years ago. A week before, he had called me on the phone, and he was drunk as hell. I knew something was up because my brother never, ever calls me. He only texts. I heard a tone in his voice and asked him to come visit and meet my newborn daughter at the time, to which he agreed. Well, he never came. I've wrestled with the idea that I could have prodded him more or stopped him from doing what he was going to do. No amount of therapy will ever truly rid me of that feeling of guilt, even though his mind was made, and he ultimately made his own decision. My stepmother died of cancer in 2019. In 2016, I noticed she was starting to talk more slowly, with a slight slur, and getting a little forgetful, but I chalked it up to her getting older and said nothing. Every time I visited for over a year, I considered mentioning it to my father, who seemed to not have noticed, as it was so gradual. Her kidneys were shutting down, poisoning her with calcium, causing mild confusion and slurring, and I said nothing, out of politeness and forgetfulness. And now I get to live with the knowledge that, if I'd just said something, maybe they could have caught it earlier. If you ever figure out how to stop feeling guilty about this, write a book or hit me up. I feel like it's corroding my soul.
I don't think this will help you feel better, but as someone who has had severe suicidal thoughts for many years, it's not anyone's fault. People would invite me places, and I would go home and obsess about everything I did wrong. I would act like everything was alright and perfect in my life, but the truth was I was hurting very deep inside 100% of the time. There was nothing anyone could have done to help me out of that mindset. The only thing I could do was to try and help myself and find the right medication. I finally did about 3 years ago, but every once in a while, I still get the I am pointless, and the world would be better off without my dumbass thoughts. It's nobody's fault but my screwed up brain chemistry. Knowing someone who was murdered, not dead from old age or an illness or killed in an accident, but purposeful murder. It is horrific on every level. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Makes a lot of issues more personal and less generally political, especially when you add in cultural context for the country it happens in.
That was a scream I'll never get out of my head, listening to when my neighbor found out that her son was murdered. It was 40 years ago, and I can still hear her scream. Can't imagine what she went through.
One of my earliest memories is my mother's blood-curdling screams of my sister's name over and over the morning she found her. My sister had multiple health issues and died in her sleep. I have struggled with suicide thoughts in the past, and the sound of that scream, and never wanting to be the one to prompt it, has kept me from the edge a few times.
What it's like to be homeless, and how easily one can end up homeless and how difficult it is to get back on your feet. So many of us are one bad turn of luck away from it, and I think about that a lot. Yup, my father died, my brother became a deadbeat drug addict, and my mother got strokes and dementia. It took me 36 months to get a place again.
I'm not homeless, but it's something that absolutely is a possibility in the near future. It is absolutely having a huge effect on me already. I'm having trouble sleeping. It's affecting my work. Today, I received a thinly veiled threat that my job might be on the line due to my performance. Between the sleep issues and knowing the possibility of homelessness is just around the corner, it's affecting my mood. Depression is definitely kicking back in, which is also affecting my work. It's a spiral. I feel like I'm being dragged down into the depths, and I can't see a way out of it this time. This one is going to drown me.
Depending on your state, it may or may not be all that useful, but 211 can be a good resource to check out. Typically you call in, tell them what area of the state you're in, and then they can help connect you to some resources, whether it's assistance finding housing, job search, food banks, etc. It can be very helpful sometimes. I was homeless at 18. I remember that near sleep you get in your car. You never fully sleep comfortably, you're just kind of half sleeping, scared, cold, usually hungry. I was truly blessed to have a couple angels come into my life, so I was not homeless for long, but I agree, you can't understand what it feels like. I see a lot of homeless people holding up signs near shopping centers near us. I tell my wife and kids which ones are homeless and which are not. They ask how I know. I tell them you can see it in their eyes. Homeless have a look you can't replicate.
Domestic abuse. While, unfortunately, common enough that there are many victims of this, it's hard to explain what it's like to people who have never experienced it. It's one of those things that if it happened to you, another victim will just get it when you talk about it to them. Edit. The number of replies from people who were victims of domestic abuse is rather heartbreaking. I'm glad you guys managed to escape and heal.
Being deaf. I have profound hearing loss. I barely know any American Sign Language, ASL. The reason life is so difficult is that you learn so much by hearing conversations in group settings. This is simply not possible with severe hearing loss. I can only hear people one-on-one. It absolutely destroys your social life, and you constantly feel incompetent even in the most mundane social situations. Edit. I know fingerspelling and numbers, but that's basically it for sign language. Even if I learned it, I don't have many deaf people in my area to use it on. And well, friends, that was all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, let me know with a thumbs up so that YouTube can share these stories with more people. Remember to hit the bell icon to be the first to know when we upload a new video. See you next time.